Before Eve, there was another, a woman, a rebel, a force of nature, a destroyer of divine order. She was called the first wife, the night demon, the mother of monsters, the seductress who stole men's souls. But here's what they never told you. Every name they gave her was designed to make you forget what she truly was. She has been banished from paradise, demonized in scripture, worshipped in shadows, and feared across millennia. Her story isn't just myth, it's a warning, a legacy, a name buried so deep in fear that speaking it was once considered an invitation to darkness itself. Some say she was humanity's first act of rebellion. Others claim she was the original sin made flesh. Yet perhaps the most terrifying truth of all is that Lilith was never evil. She was simply free. Today, we uncover the woman they tried to erase, the power they couldn't control, and the question that haunts every tradition that speaks her name. What happens when the first woman refuses to kneel? Welcome to ancient underworld, where gods fall, monsters rise, and devils whisper through the shadows of forgotten myths. If you enjoy exploring the dark side of mythology, like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another forgotten tale. 4,000 years before Christianity claimed dominion over the human soul, ancient scribes were already writing warnings about a woman who could not be controlled. In Sumerian tablets carved when the world was young, her name appears as Lilitu, a wind spirit, a storm demon, a force of nature that could not be tamed. But was she truly a demon, or was she something else entirely? The Babylonians knew her too, calling her Lilitu, a creature of the night who moved through shadows and brought chaos to ordered lives. Yet here's what's fascinating. In these earliest mentions, she isn't described as evil. She is described as wild, untamed, belonging to no master and answering to no authority. In a world where everything had its place, Lilith was the anomaly that refused classification. Why did ancient scribes keep returning to her story? The answer emerges in later texts, where her true nature begins to surface not as a simple demon, but as something far more threatening to the established order. It wasn't until much later, in Jewish folklore of the medieval period, that her forbidden story began to emerge. The alphabet of Ben Sira, a text that rabbis would later try desperately to suppress, tells of Adam's first wife, not Eve, but Lilith, formed from the same earth in the same moment as her counterpart. According to this dangerous text, when Adam demanded that Lilith lie beneath him, she refused. "Why should I lie beneath you when I was made from the same earth in the same way?" The audacity of the question shattered the divine order. Furthermore, she spoke the name of God, a name so powerful it could not be spoken, and with that word she rose into the air and fled Eden of her own choice. But here's where the story becomes truly dangerous. Lilith didn't fall from grace, she walked away from it. She wasn't cast out for disobedience. She left because she refused to accept a paradise built on her subjugation. In that single act of defiance, she became something that no religious authority could tolerate. A woman who chose freedom over safety, truth over peace. The rabbis who recorded this story knew its power. If women heard about Lilith, it would plant a seed that no amount of doctrine could destroy. Therefore, they began the systematic work of transformation, turning the first free woman into the first demon. But the methods they used to destroy her reputation would reveal just how far religious authorities were willing to go to silence a single woman's story of rebellion. They couldn't kill her story, so they rewrote it. They couldn't erase her name, so they poisoned it. What happened next was perhaps the most calculated character assassination in religious history. The woman who had walked away from paradise became the demon who stalked the night. In rabbinic literature, Lilith transforms from a complex figure of rebellion into a straightforward force of evil. She becomes the demon who visits men in their sleep, who seduces them in dreams, who steals their seed to birth more demons into the world. Additionally, she becomes the killer of infants, striking in the night when mothers sleep. But why these specific fears? What did each accusation reveal about the accusers themselves? Every evil attributed to her was a deliberate perversion of feminine power. Sexuality became seduction, Independence became destruction, choice became chaos. She was blamed for miscarriages, for stillbirths, for sudden infant death. Any tragedy that struck a family without explanation became Lilith's work. Mothers hung amulets over their children's beds, inscribed with the names of 3 angels who had supposedly overpowered her: Sanoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjalof. Nevertheless, here's the question that cuts to the heart of everything. What was the church really afraid of? Was it truly concerned about a demon who killed children? Or was it terrified of women who might follow Lilith's example? Was the real threat her supernatural powers, or was it her refusal to accept that divine law required feminine submission? The demonization of Lilith wasn't just about creating a monster to fear. It was about creating a warning for any woman who might dare to think she deserved equality. "Look what happens," they whispered, to women who refused their place. Yet even as they painted her as evil incarnate, something else was happening in the shadows. But these whispers came from a place the church could never control: the hidden mystical traditions where Lilith would be reborn not as a demon, but as something far more dangerous to religious authority. Before we dive deeper into Lilith's transformation from outcast to goddess, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Ancient Underworld, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss another video exploring the myths they tried to erase. But you cannot bury power. You cannot chain the wind or cage the storm. Despite centuries of demonization, despite every attempt to bury her story beneath layers of fear and shame, Lilith refused to disappear. In the hidden corners of mystical tradition, her true nature continued to emerge, not as a demon, but as something far more powerful: a goddess. In Kabbalistic tradition, Lilith becomes something that transcends the simple categories of good and evil. She is the queen of the night, the ruler of the Qliphoth, not hell, but the realm of unbound potential, of power that exists outside divine law. Here, she is not Adam's rejected wife, but Samael's consort, an equal partner in cosmic forces that shape reality itself. Some texts describe her as the divine feminine in its most primal form, not the nurturing mother or the submissive wife, but the autonomous woman who answers to no authority but her own. What happens when sacred power chooses to be dangerous rather than safe? She becomes the patron of women who refuse marriage, who choose independence, who walk forbidden paths. In these traditions, to call upon Lilith is not to invite evil, but to claim power that patriarchal religion has declared taboo. Her worshippers seek not destruction, but transformation, the kind that tears down unjust structures to build something new. However, here's where her story becomes truly complex. The line between deity and demon begins to blur completely. Is Lilith worshipped because she represents feminine power, or is she feared because that power threatens everything built on its suppression? The answer depends entirely on where you stand in relation to the structures she challenges. Modern feminist spirituality has reclaimed Lilith as a symbol of resistance, of the courage to choose difficult freedom over comfortable captivity. She becomes the archetype of the woman who would rather be called a demon than pretend to be less than she is. What makes Lilith so enduringly powerful is this: she represents the possibility that women might choose to be dangerous rather than safe, powerful rather than protected, free rather than loved. But her story doesn't end in ancient mystical texts. It explodes into modern culture in ways that prove her power is far from dormant. She has risen from the ashes of her own burning. Something remarkable has happened in the past few decades. Lilith has returned from the shadows, and this time she's not hiding. From television screens to concert halls, from feminist literature to spiritual practices, her name is being spoken again. Not in whispers of fear, but in declarations of power. In popular culture, she appears as a complex figure of strength and rebellion. Television shows depict her not as a simple villain, but as a character whose motivations challenge viewers' assumptions about good and evil. She becomes the anti-hero whose cause, equality, freedom, and the right to exist on her own terms resonates with modern audiences. Musicians have claimed her name, organizing festivals that celebrate feminine independence. The very name Lilith Fair deliberately invokes her legacy of defiance, creating spaces where women's voices can be heard without permission or apology. Most significantly, Lilith has found new life in spiritual communities that refuse to accept that feminine power must be channeled through patriarchal frameworks. Modern practitioners invoke her not as a demon to be feared, but as an ally to be honored. Yet even in this modern renaissance, Lilith remains controversial. She is still feared by those who benefit from structures built on feminine submission. But isn't it telling that her name can still provoke such strong reactions? This reveals that the power she represents, the power to say no, to walk away, to choose difficult freedom over comfortable captivity, remains as threatening today as it was in Eden. Whether she appears as an ancient goddess, a medieval demon, or a modern feminist icon, Lilith consistently represents the same terrifying and liberating possibility: that women might refuse to accept roles that diminish them, that they might choose autonomy over approval. She remains what she has always been, a question that refuses to be answered simply, a power that refuses to be contained, a truth that refuses to be buried. And that truth carries a message that echoes across millennia. Throughout history, one truth about Lilith has remained constant. She represents the choice to be free rather than safe, to be authentic rather than accepted, to be powerful rather than protected. Every attempt to demonize her has ultimately revealed more about the fears of those doing the demonizing than about any evil she might represent. Make no mistake, Lilith wasn't cast out for being evil. She was demonized for being too powerful, too free, too willing to choose difficult truth over comfortable lies. Her real crime wasn't disobedience, but the audacity to believe she deserved equality. In the end, Lilith remains what she has always been: a question mark in the shape of a woman, a challenge to every authority that demands submission without offering respect. A reminder that paradise built on inequality isn't paradise at all. She is the whisper in the dark that asks, what if freedom is worth any price? What if the first woman's greatest gift to humanity wasn't obedience, but the courage to say no? But Lilith isn't the only woman whose story was twisted into something monstrous. There's another figure, one with serpents for hair and a gaze that turns men to stone, whose tale reveals an even darker truth about how female power gets transformed into terror. Click here to discover why Medusa was never the villain they made her out to be. Who else was erased from history for being too powerful? Share your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you're subscribed to Ancient Underworld with notifications turned on. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones they tried hardest to forget.